The outer edge of the system had always been quiet. Not empty. Not lifeless. Just predictable. 3 defense fleets held position near the mining ring, their formations clean and symmetrical, engines idling at low output. Patrol routes cycled with perfect precision. Cargo traffic moved in steady lines between stations. Every signal, every movement, every reading matched what it had been for years. Nothing changed here. That was why Commander Howard noticed it immediately. He stood alone near the forward viewing glass, hands resting behind his back, watching the distant stars drift slowly across the black. To anyone else, it looked normal, calm, routine. But something felt off. Not a sound, not a warning, not even a fluctuation. Just a feeling. The kind that didn't belong in a system this stable. Behind him, the bridge continued its quiet rhythm. Officers spoke in low voices. Consoles pulsed with soft blue light. Data streams flowed exactly as expected, until they didn't. A chair shifted suddenly. It was a small movement, easy to miss. But in a room trained for perfection, even the smallest disruption carried weight. Howard didn't turn. "Report," he said calmly. There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough to matter. Then, "Commander, we are receiving something." Now he turned. The sensor officer sat rigid, eyes locked on the display, fingers hovering just above the controls as if afraid to touch them again. "Repeat," Howard said. The officer swallowed once. "We are receiving a signal." A few nearby crew members glanced up. Nothing dramatic. No alarms. No flashing lights. But attention shifted, like a subtle current moving through the room. Howard stepped closer. "Source?" "That's the problem, sir." The officer adjusted the display. The star map expanded outward, past the outer patrol lines, past the navigation markers, past even the long-range sensor boundary. Farther. Into dark space. Howard's eyes narrowed slightly. "There is nothing out there." "Yes, sir," the officer said quietly. "That's why this shouldn't exist." The words settled into the room like weight. For a moment, no one spoke. The system had borders. Not political ones, physical ones. Regions mapped, scanned, understood. Beyond that was empty space. Cold, silent, untouched. Nothing came from there. Ever. "Is it a reflection?" another officer asked. "Signal bounce from a relay?" "No, sir," the sensor officer replied. "Trajectory is direct. Origin is fixed. Interference?" "No." "Natural phenomenon?" A pause. "No." Howard studied the display. There it was. A single point, barely visible against the vast black, pulsing faintly. Steady. Not chaotic. Not random. Not fading in and out like background noise. Deliberate. "How long has it been active?" he asked. "Unknown. We only just detected it." "Then why now?" No one answered. Because that question carried a deeper problem. If the signal had just started, that was one concern. If it had always been there, and they were only noticing it now, that was worse. Howard exhaled slowly. "Amplify it." The officer hesitated. "Sir, we haven't classified." "Do it." A brief pause. Then the officer complied. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as the system rerouted processing power. The faint signal on the screen grew stronger, sharper. For a moment there was nothing. Just silence. Then, a sound. Low. Deep. Not loud. Not aggressive. Not distorted. Just present. It filled the bridge softly, like a distant echo carried across something vast and empty. Then it stopped. Silence returned instantly. Several officers exchanged glances. "That's it," someone muttered. The sensor officer leaned forward, scanning rapidly. "Stand by." A few seconds passed. Then the sound came again. Identical. Same tone. Same length. Same presence. And then silence. Howard felt it then. Not fear. Not yet. But something colder. This was not a distress signal. It was not a random emission. It was not a malfunction. It was controlled. Measured. Intentional. "How often?" he asked quietly. The officer checked the timing. "Every 30 seconds, Commander." The words hung in the air. 30 seconds.
Exactly.
Not variation. Not drift. Precision. The bridge grew quieter than before. Even the background hum of systems seemed lower now, as if the entire ship was listening. Howard turned his gaze back toward the distant stars beyond the glass. Out there, somewhere beyond everything they had ever mapped, something was speaking. Not loudly, not urgently, not even threateningly, just consistently, as if it already knew it would be heard. Another pulse echoed through the bridge.
Deep. Calm.
Unchanging. And for the first time in years, the system no longer felt predictable. It felt watched. The sound came again.
Deep.
Steady. Unchanging. No distortion. No fluctuation. No urgency. Just a single pulse followed by silence. Every 30 seconds.
Exactly.
On the main display, the signal marker pulsed in sync with the audio. A small point in an ocean of darkness, far beyond patrol range, beyond mapped space, beyond anything that should exist. Commander Howard didn't look away from it. Run a full spectrum analysis. Yes, Commander. The sensor officer's hands moved quickly now, hesitation replaced by focus. Frequencies expanded across multiple bands, radio, subspace, gravitational harmonics, layer after layer unfolding on the display. Lines of data streamed, then slowed, then stopped. Commander. Halrin's voice remained calm. Report. The officer frowned. It's clean. Define clean. No noise. No interference. No signal degradation across distance. That's not possible. Yes, sir. The room grew still again. Signals traveling that far should weaken, break apart, distort. Even the strongest transmissions degraded over distance. But this one
didn't.
It was as clear as if it were being transmitted from just outside the hull. Another pulse echoed through the bridge. Same tone, same length, same presence. Howard stepped closer to the console. Is it artificial? The officer didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. Not a guess. A conclusion. How can you tell? It's too precise, the officer said. Every interval is exact. Every waveform identical. No natural phenomenon repeats like this without variation. Halrin's eyes narrowed slightly. Encoding. The officer adjusted filters again, isolating the signal pattern. Layers peeled back one by one. There is structure, he said slowly. What kind? Simple. That word didn't belong here. Howard turned his head slightly. Explain. It's not encrypted in any complex format. No advanced compression. No adaptive patterning. Military?
No.
Civilian?
No.
A pause. Then the officer said something that shifted the entire room. It's almost like it wants to be understood. Silence followed. Because that was worse than encryption. Encryption hides meaning. This invited it. Another pulse. This time, no one spoke over it. They listened.
Carefully.
Howard folded his arms behind his back again. Translate it. The officer hesitated. We don't have a reference language. Then build one. Yes, Commander. The system rerouted again. Symbol mapping began, binary segmentation, pattern grouping, repetition indexing. The pulse waveforms stretched across the display, broken into fragments, analyzed, reassembled. Seconds passed. Then minutes. No one moved unnecessarily. Even the smallest sound felt intrusive now. Another pulse. Then another. Each one feeding the system more data, more pattern, more clarity. Finally, Commander, we have partial structure. Howard didn't react outwardly. Display. The main screen shifted. The clean waveform dissolved into segmented blocks, simple, repeating units arranged in identical sequences. No variation. No complexity. Just repetition. Over and over. What does it mean? Someone whispered. The officer didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the translation parameters again, aligning the repeating structures into symbolic equivalents. Then, letters began to form. Not in any known language at first. Just approximations. Fragments. Shapes trying to become meaning. Another pulse hit. The system updated instantly. The fragments aligned.
Closer now.
More refined. The officer's breathing slowed. It's consistent. Howard stepped forward. Say it. It's repeating the same phrase. The words sent a ripple through the bridge. A phrase. Not random data. Not noise. Not a beacon. A message. Howard's voice dropped slightly. Complete the translation. The officer nodded, hands moving with careful precision now. The system recalibrated one final time, locking onto the repeating structure. The next pulse came. And this time, the system understood it. The display flickered, then stabilized. Clear text began to form across the center of the screen. But the officer didn't speak yet. He just stared. Frozen. Report, Howard said, sharper now. The officer swallowed. It's ready. Howard's eyes fixed on the screen. Then show it. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, the translation began to render.
Slowly.
Deliberately. As if even the system itself understood the weight of what it was about to reveal. And just before the full message appeared, another pulse echoed through the bridge.
Deep. Calm.
Unchanged. The message didn't fully render. Not yet, because something else happened first. Commander, mass scan just updated. Howard's attention snapped from the translation screen back to the sensor display. The officer's voice had changed. Not fear. Not panic. But something tighter.
Controlled and failing.
Explain. The officer zoomed the display outward again, fingers moving faster now. The single point of the signal expanded, and something appeared behind it. At first, it looked like a shadow.
Faint.
Barely visible against the black. Is that interference? Someone asked quietly. The officer shook his head slowly. No. He adjusted the scan resolution. The shadow sharpened. Expanded.
Resolved.
The room went still. It wasn't a point. It wasn't just a signal. It was attached to something. Something massive. How large? Howard asked. No one answered immediately. The system recalculated automatically. Distance correction, mass estimation, sensor interpolation. Numbers flickered rapidly across the screen. Then stabilized. The officer stared at the result. That can't be right. Howard's voice hardened slightly. Say it. The officer hesitated. Then, larger than a fleet carrier. Silence. Not disbelief. Not confusion. Just silence. Because everyone on that bridge knew what that meant. Fleet carriers were the largest vessels in active deployment. Mobile fortresses. Command centers. Entire battle groups built around them. And this was larger. Recheck, Howard said. Already done. Same result. The shadow grew clearer as the system refined its image. Edges formed.
Lines.
Structure. Not debris. Not a cluster. A single object. Moving.
Slowly.
Directly toward the system. It's under power, the officer added quietly. Drifting. No, Commander. The display shifted again, overlaying trajectory vectors. A straight line.
Precise.
Intentional. It wasn't wandering. It wasn't lost. It wasn't damaged. It was coming here. Speed reading appeared.
Low.
Almost deceptively low. It's not accelerating, another officer said. Howard nodded slightly. It doesn't need to. That was the problem. Something that size. Didn't rush. Another pulse echoed through the bridge. This time it felt different. Not louder. Not stronger. Closer. The signal marker and the object now overlapped on the display. They were one and the same. The sound wasn't coming ahead of it. It was coming from it. Energy output? Howard asked. The sensor officer swallowed again. Controlled. Define control. It's low. Howard turned his head slowly. For that mass. Yes. That's impossible. Yes, Commander. The contradictions settled into the room. A ship larger than anything they had ever seen, running at minimal power. Weapons unknown. Shields unclear. No transponder. No identification code. Nothing. Just a signal. Repeating. Every 30 seconds. Another officer leaned forward. Could it be dormant? Automated? The sensor officer shook his head immediately.
No.
How can you be sure? The officer pointed at the trajectory line. It's adjusting. The display zoomed further. Tiny corrections. Barely noticeable, but precise.
Alive.
Aware. Guided. Not drifting.
Not automated.
Piloted. A faint murmur moved through the bridge. Howard didn't react. His eyes stayed locked on the object. Any escort ships? The sensors expanded their scan radius.
Wide.
Then wider. Nothing. No additional contacts, the officer confirmed. No fighters. No support vessels. No secondary signals. Just one. One massive object. Alone. Moving steadily toward a defended system. Another pulse. The sound rolled across the bridge again.
Deep. Calm.
Unchanging. It didn't sound like a warning. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like certainty. Howard felt it settle into his chest. Not fear. Not yet. But something heavier. What kind of vessel moves alone like this? Someone asked quietly. No one answered. Because there were only two possibilities. Either it didn't need support, or nothing could support it. The display updated again. Range estimate recalculated. Time to outer defense line. 2 hours, 53 minutes. It wasn't far. Not anymore. Howard turned slightly toward the command pit. Maintain full tracking. Yes, Commander. Do not engage. A brief hesitation. Then, yes, Commander. Because everyone understood what that order meant. Whatever this was, they were not ready to meet it with force. Another pulse echoed. The same. Always the same. But now it carried weight. Because it wasn't just a signal anymore. It had a source, a shape, a presence. And with every passing second, that presence was getting closer. Howard looked back toward the viewing glass. Out there, beyond the distant stars, something enormous was approaching. Not fast, not hidden, not afraid, just steady, as if it already knew exactly what would happen when it arrived. The translation finished. No fanfare, no sound, just words. They appeared slowly across the center of the main display, clean, precise, unmistakable. The bridge went completely silent. Even before anyone spoke, everyone felt it.
Wait.
Howard stepped closer. Read it. The sensor officer didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the screen, as if reading it again would somehow change it. Officer, Howard said, sharper now. The man swallowed. It's a single phrase, Commander. Then say it. A pause. Then, Human Dreadnought incoming. No one reacted. Not immediately. Because for a brief second, the words didn't make sense. They were too simple.
Too direct.
Too calm. Another pulse echoed through the bridge. And now, it matched the words. The timing. The structure. The meaning. It wasn't just a signal. It was a statement. Repeated. Every 30 seconds. Unchanged. Human Dreadnought incoming. Again. Silence swallowed the room. Someone shifted slightly at their station. Another officer lowered his gaze. A faint breath was released, too quiet to notice unless you were listening for it. Howard didn't move, but something behind his eyes hardened. Confirmed translation. The sensor officer nodded quickly, almost too quickly. Cross-referenced across all known linguistic structures. Pattern is consistent. There is no ambiguity. Another officer leaned forward. It could be a trick, a false flag. Howard didn't look at him. No. The officer hesitated. Commander. No one sends a false message like that. Why not? Howard finally turned slightly. Because it doesn't need to lie. That ended the discussion. Another pulse. Human Dreadnought incoming. The words felt heavier this time. Because now, they understood them. A low murmur spread across the bridge. Not panic. Not yet. But something close. Humans, someone whispered. The word itself carried history. Not recent. Not active. But not forgotten. Howard's voice cut through the room. Bring up historical archives. Last confirmed human engagement. The system responded instantly. Old data surfaced. Battle records. After-action reports. Fragments of a war most of the crew had only studied, never experienced. Images flickered across a secondary display. Ships,
Fleets.
weapons fire. And then, a single vessel. Large,
Dark.
unmoving. Someone spoke quietly. That's it. No one corrected him, because they all recognized it, even if they had never seen one in person. The shape, the scale.
The design.
A human dreadnought. Another pulse echoed. Human dreadnought incoming. The words aligned perfectly with the image now. Not abstract anymore. Not theoretical.
Real.
Howard studied the archive footage. Enemy fleets firing first. Energy beams striking layered shields. No effect. Then, return fire. One beam.
Clean.
Precise. 6 ships gone. Not damaged.
Gone.
The footage cut. Silence. Another angle. Same result. Another engagement. Same outcome. No chase. No pursuit. The dreadnought simply held position. Watching. Waiting. Dominating space without moving. Howard exhaled slowly. They don't advance, he said quietly. No one responded. They don't retreat. Another pulse. Human dreadnought incoming. The room felt smaller now. Heavy armor. Layered shielding. Planet-scale weapons. One officer recited from the archive. And patience, Howard added. That was the part that mattered. Humans didn't rush into battle. They didn't waste movement. They didn't react emotionally. They observed. They waited. And when they acted, it was final. Another officer spoke, voice tighter now. Why send only one? That question lingered, because it didn't make sense. No fleet. No escort. No support. Just one ship. One massive, unstoppable presence. Howard's gaze shifted back to the main display.
To the approaching object.
Still moving. Still slow.
Still calm.
They don't send more than they need, he said. Silence followed, because that answer was worse than any alternative. Another pulse echoed. Human dreadnought incoming. The sound no longer felt like a signal. It felt like a clock, counting down, not to an attack, not to an explosion, but to something inevitable. The sensor officer checked the range again. 2 hours, 30 minutes. Closer. The object had grown slightly on the display. Still distant. Still dark. But no longer abstract.
It had shape now. Mass.
Reality. Howard turned toward the command pit. Status. Tactical systems armed. Shields. Standing by. He paused. For just a moment. Then, hold. The tactical officer hesitated. Commander? Do not raise shields yet. A ripple moved through the bridge. Sir, if this is hostile. If it was hostile, Howard said calmly, we would already know. No one argued, because deep down, they all felt the same thing. This wasn't aggression. This wasn't panic. This wasn't even intimidation. This was something else. Something colder. More controlled. More certain. Another pulse. Human dreadnought incoming. And now, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like information. As if the sender wasn't asking anything. Wasn't demanding anything. Wasn't threatening anything.
Just stating a fact.
It was coming. And nothing in the system had been designed to stop something like that. Howard looked once more toward the distant stars. Toward the approaching shadow. For the first time since taking command, he felt uncertainty. Not fear. Not yet. But the edge of it. Because he understood something now. The message wasn't meant to scare them. It wasn't meant to provoke them. It wasn't even meant for them. It was simply being sent, because whoever was coming expected to be heard. The archive footage continued to play. No one turned it off. No one looked away. Because now it wasn't just history. It was context. On the secondary display, the old battle unfolded in silence. A Carthan fleet, larger than anything currently deployed in the system, moved in perfect formation. Hundreds of ships. Coordinated. Confident. At the center of the recording, the human dreadnought.
Still. Dark.
Unmoving. It didn't maneuver. It didn't reposition. It didn't even raise visible defenses. It simply existed. Audio logs, Howard said quietly. Yes, Commander. The system complied. Voices filled the bridge. Old voices. Tense. Controlled. Then slowly, uncertain. Target is not responding. Range closing. Weapons free. The recording shifted. Light exploded across the screen. Hundreds of energy beams converged on the dreadnought. Impact after impact. A storm of fire. Enough to erase entire fleets. But when the light faded, it was still there. Unchanged. The same dark silhouette. Untouched. A faint breath escaped someone on the bridge. Howard didn't react. He had studied this before. But studying something and watching it knowing it was about to happen again were not the same. The recording continued. Shields holding no, not shields, something else. Energy readings unchanged. Commander, it's not taking damage. The voices began to break. Not into panic. Into disbelief. Then, the dreadnought moved. Not forward. Not backward. Just adjusted.
Slightly.
Almost like turning its attention. A single light formed along its hull.
Small.
Focused. Quiet. Incoming. The beam fired.
White. Clean. Precise.
6 ships vanished. No explosion. No debris. No warning. Just
gone.
The audio cut out for a moment. Then returned. 6 ships lost. Repeat. 6 ships lost. Another beam. Another 6.
Gone.
The formation broke. Order collapsed into reaction. Ships scattering. Trying to reposition. Trying to understand. But the dreadnought didn't chase. Didn't pursue. Didn't accelerate. It simply fired. Only when needed. Only enough. Only once per target group. 9 minutes. That was all the battle lasted. 9 minutes from first shot to silence. The final frame froze on the screen. The dreadnought remained where it had started, between the survivors and what it had been protecting. Not advancing. Not retreating. Just holding space. Watching. The recording ended. Silence returned to the bridge. But it was different now. Heavier. No one spoke for several seconds.
Because no one needed to.
They all understood the same thing. That had not been a battle. It had been a demonstration. Howard finally broke the silence. They didn't destroy the fleet, he said quietly. A few officers glanced toward him. They removed the threat. Another officer swallowed. Why didn't they finish them? Howard's gaze remained on the frozen image. Because they didn't need to. That answer settled deeper than anything else. Another pulse echoed through the bridge. Human Dreadnought incoming.
Now.
It carried memory. Not just sound. Not just meaning. Experience. A junior officer spoke, voice barely above a whisper. We can't fight that. No one corrected him, because the archive had already done that. Howard turned slowly back toward the main display. The present. The approaching object. Larger now. Closer.
Real.
Distance, he asked. 2 hours, 10 minutes. It hadn't changed speed. It hadn't accelerated. It hadn't adjusted course. It was simply arriving. Another officer spoke, more controlled now. If it follows the same doctrine, Howard nodded slightly. It won't fire unless provoked. And if we provoke it? Howard didn't answer immediately, because the answer was already on the screen behind them. 6 ships.
Gone.
Then 12. Then silence. Then we repeat history, he said finally. Another pulse. Human Dreadnought incoming. The words no longer felt like a message. They felt like a reminder of what had already happened once, of what could happen again. The sensor officer adjusted the display again, zooming in further. The object had grown. Its outline sharper now. Edges more defined. Not just a shadow anymore. Structure. Armor plating.
Mass.
It didn't look fast. It didn't look agile. It looked
permanent.
Like something that wasn't built to move quickly, but to remain. To hold ground, Howard murmured. What was that, Commander? Nothing. But he knew. That was the difference. Carthan ships were built for control. For dominance. For movement. Human dreadnoughts were built to endure. Another officer leaned forward slightly. Commander, if it's coming here. Howard didn't look at him. It is. Then why? That question lingered. Because now it mattered more than anything else. Not what it was. Not how strong it was.
But
Why it was here. Another pulse echoed. Human Dreadnought incoming.
steady, calm,
Unchanging. Howard felt something shift inside him. A realization.
slow,
Uncomfortable, but clear. This isn't a warning, he said quietly. No one spoke. It's not a threat. Another pulse. He looked at the display. At the approaching giant. It's a statement. Silence followed. Because that was worse. A warning can be ignored. A threat can be challenged. A statement is already decided. The object continued forward. Unstoppable. Unhurried.
certain.
And for the first time, the system no longer felt like it belonged to them. The dreadnought crossed the outer sensor boundary. No alarm sounded. No weapons fired. No sudden maneuvers. It simply entered, as if the boundary had never existed. Contact confirmed within system range, the sensor officer said quietly. Howard didn't respond. He didn't need to. Every screen on the bridge already showed it. Larger now. Clearer.
Real.
The dark shape moved slowly across the starfield, its mass impossible to ignore. Layered armor plates overlapped across its hull, thick and deliberate, like something designed to survive anything thrown at it. It didn't glide. It didn't drift. It advanced.
Steady.
Controlled. Unstoppable. Another pulse echoed through the ship. Human Dreadnought incoming. This time, it carried farther, not just across the bridge. Across the entire fleet, across every station, every outpost, every listening system in range. It wasn't contained anymore. It was everywhere. System-wide relay confirmed, the comm officer said. All channels are receiving it. Howard nodded slightly. Of course they were. The message wasn't meant for a single ship. It was meant for everyone. Status report. Tactical fleets are in formation. Shields. Still inactive. A brief pause. The tactical officer hesitated. Commander, permission to raise defensive shields. Howard didn't answer immediately. He watched the dreadnought. Still no change. No weapon alignment. No shield surge. No targeting signatures. Nothing. Just movement. If we raise shields, the tactical officer added carefully, it may interpret that as escalation. Another officer countered quietly. If we don't, and it is hostile. Howard raised a hand slightly. Silence returned instantly. That ship, he said calmly, does not need our signals to decide its actions. No one argued, because deep down, they all knew it was true. Another pulse. Human Dreadnought incoming. The timing remained perfect, unchanging, like a heartbeat.
Slow. Heavy.
Inevitable. Distance. Howard asked. 1 hour, 40 minutes. Closer. The image updated again. Now they could see more. The hull wasn't smooth. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't designed for speed or appearance. It was built in layers. Heavy. Reinforced. Every section overlapping another, like armor meant to absorb punishment from every direction. Weapon platforms lined its sides. Dozens. Maybe more. But none of them were active. None of them were aiming. None of them were even tracking. That's wrong. A junior officer whispered. Howard glanced at him. Explain. The officer hesitated. If it's entering a hostile system, it should be locking targets, raising shields, preparing. Howard looked back at the display. Yes, he said quietly. It should. But it wasn't. That was what made it worse. Another officer spoke. Energy readings? The sensor officer checked. Still minimal. How minimal? For its size, less than 20% output. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. That's impossible. Yes, sir. At 20%, it's already inside our system? Yes. Silence again, because that meant one thing. It wasn't even trying. Another pulse. Human Dreadnought incoming. The sound no longer felt distant. It felt present. Close. Watching. A junior communications officer leaned forward. Commander, should we attempt contact? Howard considered that for a moment. Then, yes. The bridge shifted slightly as systems adjusted. Open channel, he ordered. Wideband transmission ready. Howard stepped forward slightly. This is Carthan Defense Command, he said clearly. Unidentified vessel, you are entering controlled space. Identify your purpose. The message transmitted instantly. Across all frequencies. Across all bands. The bridge waited. Seconds passed. Then, nothing. No reply. No acknowledgement. Another pulse. Human Dreadnought incoming. That was the only answer. The calm officer looked uneasy. No response, Commander. Howard nodded once. Try again. This is Carthan Defense Command. You are approaching active military territory. State your intent. The signal went out. Again. Nothing. No reply. Just the pulse. Unchanged.
Steady.
Almost indifferent. A quiet tension settled deeper into the room. They're ignoring us, someone whispered. Howard shook his head slightly.
No.
Then what are they doing? He looked back at the display. At the massive shape moving closer. They're not answering, he said, because they don't need to. Another pulse. Human Dreadnought incoming. The meaning had shifted again. At first it was a warning, then a statement.
Now.
It felt like confirmation. The sensor officer suddenly leaned forward. Commander, visual resolution improving. The main display sharpened. Details emerged.
Clear now.
The Dreadnought filled more of the screen. Its size no longer needed comparison. It was overwhelming on its own. Length beyond any single warship. Mass dense enough to distort sensor readings. Engine ports glowing faint blue, but restrained.
Controlled.
No excess output. No waste. This is wrong, the same junior officer whispered again. Howard didn't correct him this time, because he agreed. Everything about this was wrong. A ship this powerful should act powerful, should dominate, should threaten. But this one
didn't.
It simply existed. And that presence alone was enough to hold an entire system still. Another officer spoke quietly. Commander, why send only one? The question returned. Heavier now, because now they had seen it, measured it, felt it. Howard answered without hesitation. Because one is enough. No one spoke after that. Another pulse. Human Dreadnought incoming. The Dreadnought continued forward. No change in speed. No change in power. No change in behavior. It didn't react to their fleets. It didn't react to their signals. It didn't react to their presence at all. As if they were not the reason it was here. Howard felt that realization settle into place.
Cold. Clear.
Unavoidable. This isn't about us, he said quietly. The bridge didn't respond. But everyone heard him. Another pulse echoed.
Closer now. Heavier.
And for the first time, the question changed. It was no longer, backhand index pointing right, what will it do? Now it was, backhand index pointing right, what are we going to do when it doesn't stop? The Dreadnought did not slow. Not when it crossed the defense line. Not when it entered weapons range. Not even when every Carthan fleet locked tracking solutions around it. It simply continued forward. Steady. Unchanged. Commander, it has entered engagement range. Howard watched the display. I see it. No alarms triggered. No weapons fired. Thousands of targeting systems followed the massive ship, but none activated. Because no one gave the order. Another pulse echoed. Human Dreadnought incoming.
But now.
It didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt outdated. Because it was already here. The sensor officer leaned forward suddenly. Commander, course adjustment. Halrin's eyes narrowed. Show me. The trajectory line shifted.
Slightly.
Not toward the core worlds. Not toward military command. Not toward fleet formations. It angled.
Away.
A quiet ripple moved across the bridge. Where is it going? Someone asked. The display zoomed outward, overlaying sector maps. The new trajectory locked. And then, the room went silent. The outer mining ring, the officer said quietly. Howard didn't move. Because he already recognized it. That sector.
Old.
Remote. Resource-rich. And history flickered in his mind. That region, another officer whispered. Yes, Howard said. No one needed him to finish. They all knew. That's where the human colony used to be. Silence deepened. Because that changed everything. The dreadnought wasn't heading toward a strategic target. It wasn't positioning for attack. It wasn't even acknowledging the fleets around it. It was going somewhere specific. Somewhere. Personal. Another pulse. Human dreadnought incoming.
But now,
It felt different. Not a warning. Not a threat. A signal.
directed.
Howard spoke slowly. It's not here for us. The words settled heavily. The tactical officer frowned. Then why enter a defended system without communication? Howard didn't answer immediately. Because now the pieces were shifting.
Visual feed, he ordered.
The display zoomed closer as the dreadnought approached the outer ring. Now its details were undeniable. Massive armor layers. Recessed weapon arrays. Engine glow. Steady, controlled. But the most important detail. Nothing was active. No weapons. No shields rising. No targeting systems. It wasn't preparing for battle. It was arriving. The sensor officer's voice sharpened suddenly. Commander, object deployment detected. The room tensed instantly.
Missiles, someone said.
No, wait. The display zoomed further. Small shapes emerged from the underside of the dreadnought. Dozens. Then hundreds. Spreading outward in precise formation. They're not armed, the officer said, confusion creeping into his voice. Then what are they? A pause. Then, satellites. The word hit differently. Not weapons. Not fighters. Satellites. The objects spread rapidly, forming a grid pattern around the old mining sector. Energy readings began to spike. Shield signatures, the officer confirmed. Howard stepped closer. Repeat that. Defensive shielding systems, Commander. The grid expanded.
Locked.
Connected. A faint shimmer appeared around the sector. A barrier. Controlled.
Stable.
Not aggressive. A defense network. Built in real time. Inside car then territory. Without firing a single shot. Without asking permission. Without even acknowledging the fleets watching it. Another pulse echoed. Human dreadnought incoming. But now, it felt like something else entirely. Not a warning. Not a statement. A reminder. Howard understood it. And when he did, the tension inside him shifted.
Not gone.
But transformed. It's not invading, he said quietly. The bridge remained still. It's establishing presence. Another officer frowned. Inside our territory. Yes. That's an act of aggression. Howard shook his head slowly.
No.
Then what is it? He looked at the growing shield grid. At the dreadnought hovering above the old colony zone. At the precise, controlled deployment. It's claiming something. Silence followed. Because that word mattered.
Claiming.
Not attacking. Not conquering.
Claiming.
Another pulse. But this time, no one heard it as a threat. They heard it as confirmation. The past was not forgotten. The dreadnought slowed as it reached the center of the old sector. Not abruptly. Not defensively.
Smooth. Controlled.
It came to a perfect stop, floating above the region that once belonged to humans. The grid completed around it. A silent wall, not blocking trade routes, not interfering with Carthan systems, only covering that one area. The message was clear. Without a single shot fired, without a single demand spoken, this space mattered. Howard exhaled slowly. It knew exactly where it was going, he said. The tactical officer looked uneasy now. Commander, what do we do? Howard didn't answer. Because for the first time, the question wasn't simple. This wasn't an enemy force entering blindly. This wasn't an invasion fleet. This was something precise, deliberate, purposeful, and calm.
Too calm.
Another pulse echoed. Human dreadnought incoming. But no one reacted, because now, they understood something deeper. It had never been asking permission. It had already decided. The real question was no longer, backhand index pointing right, why is it here? Now it was, backhand index pointing right, what is it protecting? The shield grid stabilized. A faint shimmer stretched across the old mining sector. Barely visible, but unmistakable. A barrier had been placed. Not aggressive, not expanding, just there,
Protecting something.
the bridge remained silent as data continued to stream. Howard didn't move. Scan inside the grid, he said quietly. The sensor officer hesitated. Commander, the field is interfering with deep scans. Push through it. Yes, Commander. The systems adjusted. Frequencies shifted. Long-range scanners recalibrated, probing deeper through the layered interference. At first, nothing. Just distortion. Static. Fragments. Then, wait. The officer leaned forward. Commander, I'm getting faint returns. Halloran's voice stayed steady. Define faint. Low energy readings inconsistent, but structured. Natural? The officer shook his head slowly. No. A pause. Then he said it. There are patterns. The words hit harder than expected. Patterns meant one thing. Not debris. Not background noise. Something organized. Something built. Clarify, Howard said. The display zoomed in further. The surface of the old colony world appeared, dark, damaged, scarred from decades of abandonment. Broken structures. Collapsed towers. Dust covering everything.
Dead.
Or, at least it had been. Beneath the surface, the officer said, voice tightening. Energy signatures, deep underground. How deep? Several layers below the original colony grid. Halloran's eyes narrowed slightly. Artificial. Yes. Silence spread across the bridge. Because there was only one implication. Another officer whispered it. There's something alive down there. No one corrected him. Because no one could. Another pulse echoed.
But now.
No one paid attention to it. Howard stepped closer to the display. Life signs. The officer adjusted the scan again, filtering noise, isolating patterns. Very weak. How many? I can't get an exact count. Estimate.
A pause.
More than 0. That was enough. A slow realization moved through the room.
Heavy.
Uncomfortable. Impossible. They said the colony was evacuated, someone murmured. Howard didn't respond. Because that had been the official report. 30 cycles ago. After the war. All survivors extracted. No remaining civilians. That's what the record said. But records could be wrong. Another officer spoke quietly. What if they weren't? No one answered. Because now the truth was forming.
Piece by piece.
Halloran's voice lowered. They didn't come here for territory. The bridge listened. They didn't come here for resources. Another pause. They came here. He looked at the faint signals beneath the surface. For someone, the weight of that realization settled over everyone. Another alert appeared suddenly. Commander, movement detected. The display shifted. The Dreadnought. Its lower hull panels were opening.
Slowly. Deliberately.
From within, smaller vessels emerged. Not fighters. Not attack craft. Transports. Unarmed. Moving carefully toward the surface below. Scan them, Howard ordered. The officer complied immediately. No weapon signatures. Cargo. A brief scan. Medical equipment. Silence. Repeat, Howard said. Medical units confirmed. Construction modules. Atmospheric stabilizers. Not weapons. Not soldiers. Not invasion. Help. The realization hit all at once. They're not attacking, someone whispered. Howard didn't take his eyes off the screen. They're recovering. The transports descended slowly, breaking through the cloud layer, disappearing toward the ruined surface. The bridge waited. Watching. Listening. Minutes passed. Then, surface activity detected. The display sharpened again. Faint signals grew stronger. Power systems activating.
Lights.
Small at first. Scattered. Then more. And more. Across the dark surface. Points of light appeared. Like stars being reborn. They're bringing it back online, the officer said quietly. Howard felt something shift inside him. Not fear. Not tension. Something else. Something heavier. Visual feed, he said. The system switched to long-range optical. Grainy at first. Unclear. Then, it focused. A landing zone. Dust rising as human transport settled. Doors opened. Figures emerged. Armored shapes first. Careful.
Scanning.
Then, others. Unarmored.
Slow.
Unsteady. A bunker entrance cracked open beneath the surface. Metal doors that hadn't moved in decades. They opened, and people stepped out. Not soldiers. Not invaders. Civilians. Older.
Thinner.
But alive. The entire bridge went silent. Because this was not what anyone expected. One of the figures moved forward.
Smaller.
A child. She stepped out into the light, shielding her eyes. Looking up. At the sky. At the massive dreadnought hovering above. Even through the weak feed, her voice was faintly picked up. They came back. No one spoke. Because nothing needed to be said. Howard felt it settle inside him.
Cold. Clear.
Unavoidable. The signal. The message. The entire approach. It had never been meant for them. It had been meant for her.
For all of them.
A promise sent across empty space. Repeated. Every 30 seconds. Until it was heard. Human Dreadnought incoming. Not a warning. Not a threat. A message. Backhand index pointing right, we heard you. Backhand index pointing right, we are coming back. Howard exhaled slowly. They never left them, he said quietly. No one corrected him. Because the evidence was in front of them. 30 cycles. Underground. Waiting. Believing. And now, rescue had arrived. Another officer whispered. Almost to himself. We didn't know. Horan's voice was calm.
No.
A pause. Then, we didn't look. That truth hit harder than anything else. The Karthan had claimed the system. Built stations. Extracted resources. Expanded control. But they had never scanned deep enough. Never questioned the assumption. Never checked. And now, the consequences of that assumption stood beneath a human dreadnought.
Alive.
Waiting. Protected. Another pulse echoed across the system. But this time, no one felt fear. Because now, they understood what it meant. The system didn't stay quiet for long. It never did. Tension draws attention. And attention draws predators. Commander. Multiple jump signatures detected. Halloran turned instantly. Source? Outer system, not Karthan, not human. The display shifted outward. Space tore open in flashes of distorted light. Ships emerged.
Fast.
Aggressive. Uncoordinated. Identify, Halloran ordered. The sensor officer scanned quickly. Pirate vessels. A ripple moved across the bridge. Of course, raiders always came when systems were distracted. And, right now, the entire system was focused on one thing. Count. 20 no, 23 attack cruisers. Weapons hot. Engines flaring. Moving fast toward the mining sector. They think we're weak, the tactical officer said quietly. Howard didn't respond. Because the pirates had made a fatal mistake. They hadn't scanned deeply enough. They hadn't understood what had just arrived. Another pulse echoed across the system. But it had changed. Not incoming. Not anymore.
Now.
The transmission shifted.
Clear. Steady.
Human Dreadnought present. The words rolled across every channel. The pirates heard it. The fleets heard it. The survivors below heard it. And for the first time, it sounded like a warning. The pirate ships didn't slow. They accelerated. Weapons charging. Targeting systems locking onto the mining sector. On the shield grid. On the unarmed transports below.
They're going to fire, someone said.
Halloran's voice cut in. All fleets hold position. The tactical officer turned sharply. Commander. That is an order. A tense silence followed. Because every instinct screamed to act. But Halloran had seen the archives. He knew what came next. The dreadnought moved. Not fast. Not dramatically. Just enough. Its engines flared slightly brighter. Energy output rose. From 20% to 50%, then higher. The change was immediate. The entire system felt it, even without understanding how. Power radiated outward. Heavy. Controlled. Terrifying. The pirate fleet hesitated. Only for a second. But it was enough to matter. Then, they fired. Dozens of energy beams streaked toward the shield grid, toward the surface, toward the civilians below. The Dreadnought responded. Instantly. No warning. No hesitation. Its weapon ports open along its sides. Not all.
Just a few.
Precision over excess. A faint glow built, then vanished. 3 pirate ships disappeared. Not damaged. Not crippled.
Gone.
The rest of the fleet scattered instantly. Formation collapsed. Panic replaced confidence. What was that? One officer whispered. Howard didn't answer, because he was watching something more important. The Dreadnought did not pursue. It did not chase the fleeing ships. It did not unleash full firepower. It fired. Only enough. Another volley.
2 more ships gone. Clean.
Effortless. The remaining pirates turned to retreat. Engines flaring. Trying to escape. The Dreadnought didn't accelerate. Didn't reposition. It simply tracked. Selected targets. Removed threats. Within 2 minutes, it was over. The pirate fleet was gone. Destroyed or fleeing beyond the system edge. Silence returned. But not the same silence as before. This one was heavy, because now they had seen it live. Not archived. Not theoretical.
Real.
Controlled. Absolute. The Dreadnought powered down. Energy levels dropped again. 70%. 50%. Then back to minimal. As if nothing had happened, the shield grid remained intact. The transports continued their work. Uninterrupted. Unthreatened. The civilians below never stopped moving. They never ran. They never panicked. Because the threat had been removed. Before it reached them. Another officer spoke, barely above a whisper. They didn't even try. Howard corrected him quietly. They didn't need to. Another pulse echoed. Human Dreadnought present. The words carried a new meaning now. Not arrival. Not warning. Presence.
Stability.
Protection. A junior officer stared at the display. They defended our territory. Howard shook his head slightly.
No.
The officer frowned. Then what did they defend? Howard looked at the shield grid. At the transports. At the surface below. They defended their people. Silence followed. Because that difference mattered. Another officer added quietly. They didn't ask permission. Howard nodded. No. And they didn't apologize.
No.
The bridge remained still. Because everyone understood now. This wasn't conquest. This wasn't invasion. This wasn't even retaliation. This was something else. Something more dangerous. Responsibility. Another pulse echoed across the system. Human Dreadnought present. And now, no one questioned it. Because they had seen what that presence meant. Not chaos. Not destruction. Control. Precision. Restraint. Power. Used only when necessary. Howard folded his arms behind his back again. His gaze steady. Focused. Understanding. They showed us something, he said quietly. No one interrupted. They could destroy everything here. A pause. But they chose not to. The weight of that choice settled into the room. Because that was real power. Not what you can destroy,
but what you decide not to.
Another officer spoke softly. Commander, what happens if something stronger comes? Howard looked at the Dreadnought. At the calm, unmoving giant above the colony. Then we find out if this system belongs to us. He paused. Then finished. Or if it's under protection. Another pulse echoed.
Steady. Calm.
Unchanging. And for the first time, the system didn't feel threatened. It felt guarded. The system did not return to normal. It couldn't, because something had changed that couldn't be undone. Above the restored colony world, the Dreadnought remained. Silent.
Still.
Unmoved. Its massive hull reflected the distant star like a second, darker moon hanging in orbit. The shield grid shimmered faintly around the surface below, stable and precise. No expansion. No aggression. Just presence. Commander Howard stood alone near the observation glass. Behind him, the bridge operated at low volume.
Voices were quieter now.
Movement slower. Every action measured, as if the entire crew understood they were no longer the dominant force in the system. They were something else. Witnesses. Commander. Howard didn't turn. Yes. The council is requesting immediate communication. A pause. Then, open it. The air shifted as the secure channel activated. Holographic projections formed behind him. Leaders of the Carthan system, their expressions tight, controlled, uncertain. Commander Halloran, one of them said. Confirm current status. Halloran kept his gaze on the dreadnought. It has established a defensive perimeter around the outer, mining sector. We are aware of that, another leader replied. We are asking about intent. Halloran turned slightly. They have not declared hostile action. They entered our territory, without permission. Yes. They deployed military infrastructure. Yes. They destroyed vessels inside our system. Yes. Each answer was simple.
Direct.
Unavoidable. The chamber grew tense. Then why? One leader asked sharply. Have you not engaged? Halloran didn't hesitate. Because we would lose. Silence.
Heavy.
Uncomfortable, but honest. Another leader leaned forward. You are certain? Halloran's eyes didn't move. I am certain. A pause followed. Then, what do they want? That was the question.
The only one that mattered now.
Halloran turned his gaze back to the surface below. To the lights. To the movement. To the survivors being lifted into orbit. They haven't asked for anything. The leaders exchanged looks. That is not possible. It is, Halloran said calmly. They have made no demands. Issued no threats. Declared no claim beyond the perimeter they've established. Then why are they here? Halloran watched as another transport lifted from the surface, carrying civilians, bringing them home. They are finishing something, he said quietly. The words settled into the chamber. One of the leaders frowned. Finishing what? Halloran didn't look away from the screen. A promise. Silence followed, because that answer carried more weight than any military report. Another leader spoke, more cautiously now. If we allow this, we show weakness. Halloran shook his head slowly.
No.
Explain. He finally turned fully toward the holographic figures. If we challenge them and fail, a pause. We show irrelevance. That landed harder. The room grew still. Because this wasn't just about strength anymore. It was about perception, reputation, survival. Another leader spoke quietly. And if we accept this? Halloran answered without hesitation. Then we adapt. A long silence followed. Because the choice was clear now. Not simple, but clear. Outside, the dreadnought adjusted slightly in orbit. Not aggressive, not defensive, just watching. Waiting. Not for orders. Not for permission. For a decision. Halloran turned back toward it. They are not here to conquer us, he said. The council listened. They are not here to punish us. A pause. They are here for their people. Another leader asked quietly. And after that? Halloran didn't answer immediately. Because that part was unknown. Finally, they haven't told us. The uncertainty remained. But it felt different now. Not threatening. Just unresolved. Below, on the surface, more lights came online. The colony was returning. Not as it had been, but as something new. Stronger. Protected. A voice came from behind Halloran. Commander, incoming transmission. He turned. Source? The officer hesitated. The dreadnought. The entire bridge stilled. Audio only. Halloran stepped forward. Play it. The speakers activated. A voice filled the room.
Calm.
Controlled. Human. This is Human Dreadnought Sentinel. No distortion. No noise. Just clarity. We are maintaining a humanitarian protection zone. A pause. We are not here for war. Silence. Then, if unchallenged, we will remain non-hostile. The message ended. No threats. No demands. No negotiation. Just truth. Halloran exhaled slowly. They're giving us a choice, he said. No one disagreed. The council channel reactivated. All eyes turned toward the leaders. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, we will not engage, the lead council member said. The decision hung in the air. Fragile. Important. We will open diplomatic channels. Another pause. And we will observe. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't alliance. But it was something new. Understanding. Howard nodded once. Understood. The channel closed. The bridge remained quiet. But not tense anymore. Something had shifted. Not fear. Not dominance. Balance. Above the world, the dreadnought remained. Not as an invader. Not as a conqueror. But as something far more powerful.
A guardian.
The signal echoed again across the system. But it had changed. Not incoming. Not present. Now. Protection active. The word spread across every channel. Every station. Every ship. And this time, no one feared it. Because now they understood. Howard returned to the viewing glass, watching the massive silhouette against the stars. His second-in-command stepped beside him. Do you trust them? The officer asked quietly. Howard thought for a moment. Then,
No.
the officer frowned slightly. Howard continued. But I respect them. Outside, the colony lights grew brighter. Life returning. Families reunited. A promise fulfilled. And above it all, the dreadnought held its position.
Silent. Steady.
Unmoving. Not because it had to, but because it chose to. Howard watched it for a long moment, then spoke, almost to himself. Power isn't what you destroy. A pause. It's what you protect. The stars beyond the system felt different now. Not empty. Not silent.
But watched.
And for the first time, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like safety.